Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're diving into, TikTok legal battles and, the whole question of online responsibility.
Yeah.
You sent over some really interesting sources on this case in Venezuela,
Yeah.
where TikTok just got slammed with a $10 million fine.
Huge.
Yeah, no kidding. So the Venezuelan Supreme Court saying that viral challenges on TikTok
All right.
actually led to the deaths of 3 children.
It's a crazy case.
It is, and it really makes you think, how much responsibility does a platform like TikTok have
Right.
for what its users are doing?
It's a tough question.
It is.
And this Venezuelan case really brings it into focus.
It does.
What I find particularly interesting here is how strong of a stance the Venezuelan government's taking.
Oh, for sure.
They're not just talking about regulation, they're taking direct legal action.
Yeah, let's break down the specifics of what's actually being alleged against TikTok in this case.
Sure. So the Venezuelan government's claiming that 3 children,
Okay.
ages 12, 13, and 14, died after participating in dangerous challenges that they saw on TikTok.
Oh, wow.
We're talking about things like ingesting tranquilizer pills.
Oh, my gosh.
And inhaling harmful substances.
That's awful.
Yeah, incredibly tragic.
Yeah, it really is heartbreaking. And President Maduro himself has publicly blamed TikTok
Right.
for at least one of these deaths.
He has.
So what's the court's reasoning for actually holding TikTok responsible here?
So the Supreme Court's decision is all about negligence.
Okay.
They're essentially arguing that TikTok didn't take the necessary steps to prevent this harmful content from spreading on their platform,
Gotcha.
and that this failure directly contributed to the deaths of those children.
Wow.
So in addition to that massive fine,
Yeah.
they've also ordered TikTok to set up a local office in Venezuela
Really?
to make sure they're complying with local laws.
Wow. So they're really coming down hard on TikTok.
Yeah.
Has TikTok said anything about this whole situation?
Nothing. Absolutely silent, no public statements, no acknowledgments of the ruling or the accusations.
Huh. That's interesting given how serious this all is.
It is noteworthy.
It really makes you wonder what their strategy is.
For sure.
So I think to really understand this, we need to kind of zoom out a little bit
Okay.
and talk about this whole idea of viral challenges
Yeah.
as a phenomenon.
These challenges, they're really fascinating. I think they tap into our desire for connection, for virality, for being part of something bigger than ourselves.
I see that.
But that same virality can also be incredibly dangerous, especially when you're talking about young people
Right.
who might not fully grasp the consequences of their actions.
Yeah, I mean, we all remember the Tide Pod challenge a few years back.
Oh, yeah.
And, it seems ridiculous now.
Totally.
But it really captured the world's attention for a while, and I think it showed just how quickly something that seems harmless can become dangerous.
Absolutely. And I think the Tide Pod Challenge is a perfect illustration of why this whole issue is so complex. Yeah. Where do you even begin to draw the line between individual responsibility and platform accountability?
Right.
Is it TikTok's job to predict every single dangerous trend that might emerge?
Right. And if they are held responsible for user-generated content, doesn't that start to raise some concerns about censorship and free speech?
Exactly. It's a slippery slope. On the one hand, you have this potential for real harm and a need to protect vulnerable users like these kids.
Right.
But on the other, you have this fundamental right to free expression and, the dangers of overreach by both governments and corporations.
So it seems like this case in Venezuela, it's not really just about TikTok.
Right.
It's kind of about the future of online platforms in general.
I think so.
Yeah, it really forces us to grapple with these big questions about content moderation, freedom of speech, and the role of government in the digital age.
Absolutely.
This isn't just happening in Venezuela either.
No, not at all.
I mean, we're seeing similar debates play out all over the world.
All over.
Governments are really trying to figure out
Right.
how to keep up with how fast technology is changing.
It's a challenge.
It is.
They're trying to figure out how to regulate these incredibly powerful platforms without stifling innovation or infringing on people's rights.
It's a tough balance.
It is.
So I guess this brings us to the bigger picture. How does this Venezuelan case fit into the global landscape of social media regulation?
Right.
What are other countries doing to grapple with these same challenges? And what approaches are they taking?
Well, we're seeing a real spectrum of approaches globally. So in Europe, for example, the EU has implemented some of the strictest regulations, with things like GDPR and the Digital Services Act.
Right. The EU's really been kind of leading the charge on this.
They have.
What about here in the U.S.? What kind of regulations are we looking at?
Well, things are a little more fragmented here in the U.S., I guess you could say.
Mm-hmm.
We've got, a bunch of different state-level laws and then some federal proposals that are being tossed around, but nothing quite as comprehensive as what the EU's doing.
I see.
There's a lot of debate here,
Right. Right.
about how to strike that balance between protecting users and respecting free speech.
Yeah. It sounds like finding that balance is really the key challenge here.
It is.
Too much regulation, and you risk stifling innovation and free expression.
Right.
But too little, and then you leave users vulnerable to harm.
Exactly.
So it's tough.
And it's not just about the laws and regulations either.
Okay.
It's also about the platforms themselves.
Right.
And the choices that they're making.
Right.
What kind of content moderation policies do they have in place? How are they using algorithms to control what users see?
Yeah.
And how transparent are they being about all of this?
Those are all good points.
Yeah.
And, speaking of content moderation practices, going back to the Venezuela case.
Yeah.
They're facing some pretty specific criticism there, right?
They are, yeah. Venezuelan officials are arguing that TikTok's community guidelines, while they exist, aren't really being enforced.
Oh, I see.
They're saying that TikTok isn't doing enough to proactively identify and remove dangerous content.
Gotcha.
And that they're not responding quickly enough when these harmful trends emerge.
So that raises a really interesting question then. How can a platform like TikTok, with millions of users uploading videos constantly, how can they effectively moderate all of that content?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Yeah.
It's definitely a massive undertaking.
It seems almost impossible.
And it's a constant game of cat and mouse.
Right.
These platforms are relying heavily on AI, human moderators, and user reporting to try to stay ahead of the curve. But it's a huge challenge.
Yeah.
Especially with new trends and challenges popping up all the time.
It's like a never-ending battle.
It is.
And then you have to consider the cultural context, too, right?
Oh, absolutely.
What might be totally fine in one country could be seen as completely inappropriate in another.
Exactly. The definition of harmful can be very subjective, and it's definitely culturally influenced.
It is.
So these platforms like TikTok, they have to navigate this really complex web of global norms and values.
Yeah.
It's not easy.
Not at all. So where do we go from here?
Right.
What are the potential outcomes of this Venezuelan case? What could it mean for the future of social media more broadly?
Well, it's hard to say for sure.
Okay.
But this case could have a real ripple effect.
In what way?
Well, we might see other countries emboldened to take similar legal action against social media companies.
I see.
Especially if they feel like those companies aren't doing enough to protect their citizens.
So it could set a precedent.
It could.
And do you think this might lead to platforms like TikTok taking a more proactive approach?
Possibly.
To content moderation?
They might start investing even more in AI and human moderation.
Okay.
And they might be more likely to just take down content that's even remotely risky. Just to avoid any potential legal trouble.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But there's a risk there, too.
What do you mean?
The risk of over-censorship and silencing dissenting voices.
Right. Yeah, it's a fine line.
It is a delicate balancing act, and there's no easy answer.
Well, one thing's for sure, this conversation isn't going away anytime soon.
Definitely not. The Venezuelan case has really brought these issues to the forefront.
It has.
And I think it's forcing all of us to think critically about the role of social media,
right,
in our lives and in society as a whole.
It's a good reminder that these platforms are really powerful tools.
They are.
And they can be used for good or for bad.
Absolutely.
So it's up to all of us, users, platforms, governments, to figure out how to harness that power responsibly.
I think so.
It's a big responsibility.
It is.
So as we wrap up our deep dive on this complex issue, what are some key takeaways for our listeners?
Okay, well, I think the first step is just awareness.
Awareness of what?
Just paying attention to the content you're consuming on social media.
Okay.
Think critically about those messages you're seeing.
Right.
Be aware of the potential impact it might be having on you and on the people around you.
Yeah, that's a great point. We can't just passively scroll through our feeds anymore.
Right.
We need to be active participants in shaping this digital landscape.
Exactly.
Yes.
And don't be afraid to have those tough conversations,
Yeah.
with your friends, family, especially with young people.
Right.
About responsible social media use.
I agree.
Help them develop those critical thinking skills and that healthy skepticism that's so important these days.
Yeah, exactly. It's about empowering them to navigate this complex world safely and responsibly.
Exactly. And remember, this is an evolving conversation.
Right.
There are no easy answers.
Yeah.
And the solutions are probably going to come from, a combination of individual responsibility,
Okay.
Platform accountability and, some thoughtful regulation.
It's a team effort.
It is.
So stay informed, stay engaged, and keep asking those tough questions.
Exactly.
The future of social media kind of depends on it.
I think so.
It's been a really thought-provoking deep dive, I gotta say.
Yeah.
What stands out to you the most from all of this?
For me, it's that stark reminder that the digital world has real-world consequences.
Yeah.
We've seen it with election interference, online harassment, and now, tragically, with these cases in Venezuela.
It's true. It's easy to get caught up in the abstract, the algorithms, the legal debates. But at the end of the day, this is about people's lives.
It is, and it really highlights how much power these platforms have.
For sure.
They can shape narratives, influence behavior, and even, as we're seeing, potentially put lives at risk.
That's a lot of responsibility.
It is a huge responsibility.
One thing that really struck me while we were going through these sources is just the sheer speed at which this all unfolds.
It's incredible.
A viral trend can emerge out of nowhere, spread like wildfire, and have these devastating consequences before anyone can even react.
Yeah, that's the nature of the internet, isn't it?
It is.
This constant state of flux and, our traditional systems of regulation and accountability.
Right.
They're struggling to keep up.
So it kind of brings us back to that fundamental question then. What can we do?
Right.
As individuals, as a society, how do we navigate this new digital landscape responsibly?
Well, I think, first of all, we need to move beyond this idea of just like banning or deleting everything.
Yeah.
That's potentially harmful.
Right.
It's just not realistic.
Yeah.
And it also risks creating this kind of sterile online environment that stifles creativity and free expression.
It's not the answer.
No, I agree with you. It's about finding that nuanced approach, that balance between protecting people and preserving those fundamental freedoms.
It's about freedom and responsibility.
Exactly. And I think a big part of that is education.
Okay. How so?
We need to be having these conversations. It's not just, in academic circles or in government hearings, but in our homes.
In our daily lives.
Yeah, in our schools with our friends and family.
Right.
We need to equip young people with the critical thinking skills to sort through all of this.
Yeah.
To discern facts from fiction, to recognize harmful content, to understand the consequences of their actions online.
And we as adults need to be modeling that responsible behavior.
Absolutely.
We need to be mindful of our own social media use.
Right.
Think critically about the information we're consuming and sharing.
Yeah.
Recognize that we all play a role in this.
It's a collective effort, for sure.
It requires a fundamental shift in how we think about the internet.
I think so.
It's not just a playground.
Yeah.
It's a powerful tool.
It is.
That can be used for good or for ill.
Right.
And it's woven into the fabric of our lives at this point.
Yeah.
So we need to approach it with intention and responsibility.
We do.
So to everyone listening, as you navigate this complex digital world, here are a few things to keep in mind. Be aware of the influence that these platforms have. Think critically about the content that you're consuming.
Right.
Engage in those difficult conversations.
Yeah.
And advocate for a more responsible and ethical digital future.
The Venezuelan case is a stark reminder that the stakes are high.
They are.
The choices we make today as individuals, as tech companies, as a global community, they're going to shape the digital world of tomorrow.
We have a responsibility to get this right.
We do. Let's make those choices wisely.
Well said. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Of course.
We'll see you next time.
Yeah, it's been a really thought-provoking conversation.
It has.
What stands out to you most from all this?
I think for me, it's that stark reminder that what happens online has real-world consequences.
Yeah.
We saw it with election interference, online harassment, and now, tragically, with these cases in Venezuela.
It's easy to get caught up in, the abstract stuff.
Right.
The algorithms, the legal debates.
Yeah.
But ultimately, this is about people's lives.
Yeah.
It is, and it really highlights the power that these platforms have.
For sure.
I mean, they can shape narratives, influence behavior, even as we're seeing, put lives at risk.
Yeah, that's a huge responsibility.
It is a huge responsibility.
One thing that really struck me while we were going through these sources is just the sheer speed of it all.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, a viral trend can emerge out of nowhere, spread like wildfire, and have these devastating consequences before anyone even has time to react.
That's the internet for you.
It is.
This constant state of flux and, our traditional systems of regulation and accountability, they just can't keep up.
So it really brings us back to that fundamental question then, what can we do?
Right.
As individuals, as a society, how do we navigate this new digital landscape responsibly?
Well, I think we need to move past this idea of just like banning or deleting everything that's potentially harmful.
Okay.
I mean, it's just not realistic, and it risks creating this kind of sterile online environment. One that stifles creativity and free expression.
Yeah, I agree. It's not the answer.
It's about finding that nuanced approach.
Right.
That balance between protecting people and preserving those fundamental freedoms.
Freedom and responsibility.
Exactly. And I think a big part of that is education.
In what sense?
We need to be having these conversations.
Okay.
Not just, in academic circles or in government hearings, but in our homes.
Yeah, in our daily lives.
Yeah, in our schools with our friends and families.
Right.
We need to equip young people with the critical thinking skills to navigate all of this.
Yeah.
To be able to discern fact from fiction, recognize harmful content,
right,
understand the consequences of their actions online.
I think that's so important. And we as adults need to be modeling that responsible behavior as well.
Absolutely.
Being mindful of our own social media use.
Yes.
Thinking critically about the information we're consuming and sharing.
It all matters.
Yeah, recognizing that we all play a role in this.
It's a collective effort, for sure.
It requires a real shift in how we think about the internet.
Heck so.
It's not just a playground anymore.
Right.
It's a powerful tool that can be used for good or for bad.
Powerful tool.
And it's so deeply woven into our lives now.
It is.
So we need to approach it with a sense of, intentionality and responsibility.
Absolutely.
So for everyone listening, as you navigate this complex digital world, here are a few things to keep in mind. Be aware of the influence that these platforms have. Think critically about the content you're consuming. Engage in those difficult conversations.
Yes.
And advocate for a more responsible and ethical digital future.
Yeah, the Venezuelan case is a stark reminder that the stakes are high.
They are.
The choices we make today as individuals, as tech companies, as a global community, they're going to shape the digital world of tomorrow.
It's our responsibility to get this right.
It is. Let's make those choices wisely.
Well said. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Of course.
We'll see you next time.